Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
Orion Pest Control, don't ask to speak to my manager. A long horror story from Reddit. Nosleep. We're back to business as usual at Orion. Sort of. I'll get into that in a minute. But first, I just need to put it out there that sometimes the clients drive me nuts. As much as I have an apparently irresistible desire to help everyone, some people really push it. Push it right off of a cliff, which is. I'm going to stop myself before I go off on an unhinged rant about the woes of dealing with the public. Instead, I'll let yin see for yourselves what I've been putting up with. If you're not familiar with what Orion Pest Control services are, it may help to start here. We received a call from a client about mosquitoes running amok in her home. Since we had a few others to take care of that day, I informed her that the earliest that one of us could investigate the matter was in the afternoon. But because this woman is clearly so much more important than everyone else, Her Royal Highness threw a hissy fit about having to wait like a common peasant. I tried to be as nice as possible. Ma'am, I understand that it's frustrating, but there are others that called ahead of you, so we have to take care of their problems before we can take care of yours. The client huffed, okay, you clearly aren't hearing me. There are mosquitoes in my house. Yes, ma'am, I heard you. However, you are not our only client, so we ask that you please be patient, and we will be there as soon as we can. I should also mention that this client talked out of the back of her nose, if that helps to paint a picture of how her cadence was equally as grating as her personality. Okay, but do those people have mosquitoes? Like in their house, biting them and their kid over and over? My son could have Zika virus right now. Jesus Christ. I rubbed my temple with my free hand as I did my best to keep my customer service persona in place. Again, ma'am, I understand that this is frustrating, but we have a wasp infestation and termites to deal with before you and those families want their kids to be safe, just like you. In the meantime, I recommend wearing bug spray or burning a citronella candle until we can get to you. We will be there as soon as we can. You better be. And you really need to work on your customer service, sweetie. The client hung up on me. I had to pace around the office after that one. Sweetie? Shove it up your ass, you entitled, snotty. You know what? Never mind. I have many words to describe clients like that and none of them are pleasant. I hoped that she'd get mosquito bites in all of the most restricted areas of her anatomy. It probably didn't help that I was saddled with some bitterness after the dogging incident. I knew that there wasn't anything I could do about the mechanic other than stay out of his way going forward. And boy, did that eat me up. On that note, I know what the mechanic is, however, even whispering the official title of these neighbors is enough to draw them to you. I'm not sure if writing it counts and I'm not about to find that out the hard way. Just know that if you hear wings beating from the west at night, hide and pray that you'll be passed by. Placing a line of salt on all of the doors and windows facing the west keeps them from coming inside. Once they set their sights on you, they'll never stop hunting you. Even death itself fears them. You'll still be running long after your heart stops beating. But I promise, I'll elaborate more on that later. I'm getting ahead of myself. Back to the case. Raina was at the point in her training where she could be trusted to deal with termites on her own. After I had the wasp nests taken care of, I set out to Her Royal Highness home, and earlier than I'd told her, might I add. I will admit that I was tempted to dally a bit just to make her angry, but then I figured that it would be better and more professional to just get it over with. She looked exactly like how I pictured her to look, complete with a Weasley sneer that only the most unlikable of human beings are able to master. It's about time. She snapped. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. Where have you noticed the mosquitoes the most? Everywhere. She said unhelpfully. Her husband stepped in. In the kitchen and basement, mostly. To make this call even better, the husband decided to take it upon himself to follow me around as I did my inspection, asking me pointless questions and giving me advice that I didn't ask for. It got to a point where his hot breath wheezed into my ear as I shined my flashlight under their sink. Stiffly, but politely, I asked, "Sir, can you please keep your distance?" His wife chipped in, "Will you let her do her job, Curtis? It took her long enough to get here, and if you keep pestering her, it's going to take even longer." The husband puffed up and snapped, "Well, it's my house. I need to know that the person working in it knows what they're doing." They began screaming at each other. As obnoxious and uncomfortable as it was to have to bear witness to it, at least they weren't focused on me anymore. I shook my head and kept searching for the source of the infestation. What I was looking for was standing water, which is essential for a mosquito's life cycle. You eliminate the standing water, you eliminate the infestation. The space beneath the sink was completely dry. With the argument going on, I almost didn't hear it. An odd little sound. The easiest way to describe it was that it sounded like, kudo. Kudo. My head turned to follow it. That's when I noticed that one of the floorboards was slightly raised up from the rest. I interrupted their marital problems. "You said that your son was sick earlier? Would he happen to have chills and a high fever?" The client spat, "Yes, because some people dash." Not in the mood for her nonsense anymore, I cut in, "Ma'am, please just answer the question. I am trying to help you, I really am, but I'm going to need some more information in order to do that." She looked taken aback, her face bright red. While she balked, her husband answered instead, "Our son said he was feeling sick, but he does that whenever he wants to get out of something. You know how kids are. Good Lord. Parents of the year. Have you noticed your salt going missing?" The wife blinked at me, "How did you know that?" I told them that I'd be right back and went to retrieve a cage from the truck. This critter is an odd one in that not only is salt not a suitable repellent for it, but it actually loves the stuff. It can consume as much as 10 grams of salt per day. So, if you find that the salt in your home has gone missing, it could mean that a false egg has made a nest. I returned with the cage and advised the couple to either move into another room or wait outside. Would it surprise Yins when I say that they refused? Not in the mood to argue, I just shrugged. "Okay. Suit yourselves." I set the cage up next to the lifted floorboard, took my salt off of my tool belt, and sprinkled some inside the cage. It would placate the false egg once I got it inside. Using my knife, I pried the floorboard up. From behind me, the husband began to protest, but his wife snapped at him to keep still. Meanwhile, my eyes met the beady gaze of a false egg from where it hid under their floorboard. At first glance, it looks like a white chicken's egg. If consumed, it causes the host to lay more false eggs. That's how it reproduces. The telltale signs that you're looking at a false egg include 2 dark spots on the shell near the pointed top of the ovoid. Those are the eyes, which they can leave closed to camouflage themselves. You may also notice 2 small holes at the bottom of the shell, which is where its legs can retract in and out. Mosquitoes follow false eggs wherever they nest, though it's unclear why. Generally, they're more of an annoyance than anything. However, they can cause flu-like symptoms in those that they feel threatened by, so they do pose a slight danger to those with compromised immune systems. To my surprise, the false egg leapt out of its nest and into the cage, tucking its legs back into its shell comfortably. Even though it didn't seem to have any intentions of moving, I quickly shut the door of its cage. For the first time since I arrived, the clients were speechless. The woman had a hand over her gaping mouth while the man stared at the false egg in a mixture of horror and disgust. It wasn't until I stood up with the cage that the man asked, "What the hell is that?" "The source of the infestation." I replied. "I'll take this guy out to the truck. The mosquitoes should follow him, but just to be sure, I'm going to ask that you all leave the house for a few hours so that I can apply a chemical treatment that'll kill off any stragglers. And your son's condition should improve in a day or two. The couple didn't give me any trouble. They quietly collected their sick teenaged son, saying something about getting ice cream, then went away to do whatever while I dealt with the rest of the mosquitoes. Once I was done, I drove off to release the false egg somewhere where it could complete its life cycle away from humans. It is able to reproduce in any mammal. While forcing other organisms to lay eggs is bizarre and can be alarming for the affected individual, it doesn't appear to hurt the hosts, other than causing some mild abdominal discomfort. Once the false egg is laid, the host goes back to normal, which is why we generally don't feel the need to kill them. Unexpectedly, the false egg talked to me. It had a small, soft, mousy voice. "Thanks for getting me out of there." I glanced at the false egg. I had its cage on the passenger seat. Its eyes were visible, along with its little white legs as it sat on the bottom of its cage. It looked up at me as it wiggled its small feet absent-mindedly. Whenever it spoke, a small crack that resembled a toothy mouth appeared in its shell. That was something to add to our records. Not only are false eggs capable of speech, but their mouths are located below their eye spots. Stunned, I said, "You're welcome." The false egg continued, "Oh, those humans are vile. I hadn't realized it when I first made my nest. Do you want to know why I made the boy sick? Why? So that's how I learned every aspect of this family's lives. I'm sure Yins care even less than I do about some suburbanites' inter-family drama, so I'll just say that it wasn't bad enough to warrant a call to social services, but enough that I can see why that kid probably couldn't wait to turn 18. Overbearing mother, father trying to use his son to relive his glory days as a high school athlete. The false egg had done the boy a solid, giving him just enough of a fever to excuse him from lacrosse tryouts. "Where are we going?" The false egg asked after telling me all that information that I didn't know what to do with. "Back to the forest." The false egg kept swinging its little feet. "Can you take me somewhere nice? If it's not any trouble?" "Why not? Maybe some scenery would improve my mood." So, me and my little egg friend took a little drive to the pond. It was a picturesque area as well as a nice environment for a false egg. They prefer caves, but as long as they're near water, they'll be fine. When I opened its cage, the false egg hopped out, its little eyes and shelled body swiveling to take in the peaceful sight. "Oh, this is wonderful. Thank you." Before it skipped off, it paused. "I think it would only be right if I told you something that could help, since you brought me here." It turned, its shell splitting to form a mouth as it hesitated before speaking. "If you hear whispers in the woods, even if it sounds like someone you care about, don't listen. The louder they are, the safer you are. They get quieter as they get closer to confuse you." Hold on. That didn't make any sense. The whispers had gotten louder and more urgent as I approached the mechanic's clearing. Unless I was wrong, and he wasn't the one doing it. I asked, "Is the whispering thing disguising itself as a mechanic?" The false egg tilted to the side thoughtfully. "I'm afraid not. It doesn't like to pretend to be human." So, there was something else out there with me when I went looking for Victor. I remembered then that the whispers had stopped once I got close to the mechanic's clearing. When I unintentionally allowed them to lead me astray, they took me in the opposite direction of where he'd been waiting. Interesting. With the false egg wandering off to establish a new nest that was far away from humans, I headed back to the office, unsure of how to feel about the information it had given me. Victor looked annoyed when I came in. The clients had called to complain about my poor customer service. Wow. Okay. Next time, just leave the false egg there. Victor said, rubbing the bridge of his nose. They want to complain about poor customer service. We can show them bad service. It's fine, Vic. I replied. Just let them leave their 1-star Google review and move on. These people, he grumbled. Victor's headspace hasn't been much better than mine. He's been pretty much stuck waiting by the phone for those ominous calls that the mechanic mentioned in the woods. They don't happen often, but when they do, he gets grim. Quiet. He hasn't told me in detail what has been requested of him. I don't know if he simply doesn't want to talk about it or if he's sworn to secrecy. We'd had a long, uncomfortable talk during one of my days off while recovering from getting dogged. Victor stopped by with coffee and a box of donut holes. He drank the coffee but left the donut holes untouched. We sat in my small kitchen, him staring intently into his black coffee, me quietly adding more sugar to my mocha. I broke the silence. What did you want me to see the other day? I couldn't outright tell anyone that I was dead. Not without the mechanic finding out. He continued after some hesitation. It feels selfish saying it now, but I just wanted someone to know what happened to me. Victor pulled the bandana aside with a finger, revealing that a jagged, red grin had been carved across his throat. I shuddered, being forcefully reminded once again how thin skin truly is. He quickly pulled it back into place. That prompted me to ask, is the mechanic the one that? I pointed to my neck. Victor shook his head. I asked him who did. His expression darkened, someone I used to use with. He didn't believe me when I told him that I was still clean and couldn't help him get his next hit. Everything happened so fast after that. Before I knew it, I woke up in his trunk. My chest felt empty. It's strange, you know? You don't notice your own heartbeat until it's not there anymore. I shook my head slowly, a knot in my stomach as I whispered, Jesus, Vic. Where is he now? He can't hurt anyone else. We'll leave it at that. Victor muttered. I took in a shaky breath. I couldn't believe that he'd been keeping all of this in. It was a lot to take in at once, so I could only imagine how much worse it was to be the one experiencing it. Like I said, I don't blame him for what happened. He must have felt so alone. After I regained my composure, I asked, so, what does the mechanic have to do with this? Victor hesitated again, eventually saying, he couldn't touch me while I was alive, so he made sure that death couldn't get to me before he could. That's why I was trying to keep my condition quiet. I was hoping that I could outlast him long enough for the Reaper to catch up. Unfortunately, he is good at what he does and knew that I'd drag someone else into my stuff eventually. I shook my head, I dragged myself into it. I could have just minded my own business, but I didn't. I chose to go out there, even though I didn't know what I was dealing with. And I chose to say the wrong thing to the mechanic to set him off. You wouldn't have been in that position if I hadn't said anything. So, what happens now? You're just forced to do these calls. Victor sighed, it's either that, or I join the ones in the trees. The skulls. Grimly, I wondered if those trapped souls were still aware. If they knew what had happened to them. I slumped down in my seat. Is there anything we can do? As of right now, no. We just go to work, keep our heads down, do what we have to do. And from now on, I'll deal with the mechanic, even if it's for something as trivial as changing a tire. He's my problem, no one else's. So that's where we're at. Victor's technically not alive or dead, but a secret third, worse thing. Speaking of worse things, we got an emergency call in the middle of the night. After we close for the day, Victor routes calls to his phone in case there is something that can't wait until the next day. Thankfully, this is an extremely rare occurrence. Up until this incident, it's only happened twice since I've been with Orion. I joined Victor for one of those 2 emergency calls. Even though it's been 2 years since that night, I still hear the crunching of bones in my dreams. Something Yins need to know about the farmers around here is that they know how to take care of themselves. They have more encounters with the atypical than anyone else, and for the most part, they know how to live amongst things like the neighbors in relative peace. They know about leaving cream out to appease them. They know about what measures to take to defend themselves and their animals. They're a tough bunch and they usually prefer to take care of things themselves. It's highly unusual for them to reach out to us. So, when Victor told me over the phone that the emergency call was at one of the farms, I knew it was going to be bad. When he first described what the farmers were contending with, my stomach dropped. The client's brother was found on the porch with his chest entirely deflated, deliberately placed into a chair that was moved in front of the door where the family could see him. The farmers were holed up in their home. The woman of the house was pregnant, due within the next few days, which made moving her extremely difficult. They could hear whatever killed the brother giggling and tapping on the windows, mocking them. Victor was already on his way there. I arrived with my tool belt along with a shotgun and shells filled with rock salt. This may sound ridiculous, but I also donned a collar that I'd made last summer by hammering long-ass carpenter nails into the leather, then coating their pointed tips with silver. I looked a bit like a goth club reject, but when dealing with things that like to go for the throat, you got to put your pride aside. Victor's truck was in the driveway, but he was nowhere in sight. Shotgun at the ready, I glanced around as I approached the house. The body was still on the porch, untouched after the poor man had been posed there. It looked far worse than what Victor had described. His chest had caved in, like everything inside of him had been sucked clean out. His face was frozen in surprise rather than horror or pain. He'd been caught off guard and was dead long before he could react. Wings. I turned, pulling the trigger just in time as the pest tormenting this family dove at me. It tumbled to the ground with an enraged shriek. It appeared to be a woman. Well, half of one. Her legs were gone, brown entrails dangling sickeningly from her gray torso. Her leathery, hooked wings trembled as she used her bony arms to raise herself up to snarl at me, curling her lips to reveal dog-like fangs. I shot at her again. She jolted as the shell took a chunk out of her skull. That wouldn't kill her. Both her and I knew it. She skittered like a cockroach, an elongated tongue shooting out of her mouth, quick as a whip. I flinched, turning my head so she couldn't reach my face, grateful for the collar as I felt the proboscis slam into its spikes. The impact knocked me off balance, causing me to stumble. I leaned into it, hitting the ground and out of reach of the next swipe of her tongue. I took aim again, knocking her back a few feet. A dark shape suddenly appeared from the barn, a glint of metal shining in the figure's hand. Victor. I can't find the lower half. He hissed when I was in earshot. That meant we were going to have to keep her from rejoining the lower half of her body until sunrise. It was 3 a.m. Because nothing can ever be easy. Victor had found chains and a padlock in the barn. They should be heavy enough to restrain her. We just have to get close. Without her sucking our insides out, preferably. She was back in the air. I took another shot. I'd have to reload soon. I hoped that I'd have enough shells to last the next 2 hours. At the rate I was going, I'd burn through them in the next 10 minutes. Unfortunately, I missed as she soared towards the house. I used my last shot and thankfully knocked her out of the air. As I hurriedly reloaded, Victor rushed towards the fallen creature, kneeling on her chest to keep her from taking off again as he fought to get the chain around her. I heard him make a terrible choking sound, followed by her retching. She'd gotten her proboscis down his throat but had withdrawn it even quicker than she had gotten it down. I guess undead viscera doesn't taste particularly good. As she gagged, Victor pressed his forearm against her throat, pinning her so that she couldn't sink her fangs into him. I raced over, setting the shotgun on the ground next to me so that I could help him restrain her. While he held her, I coiled the chain around her squirming torso. She began to laugh. When she spoke, it sounded like an old woman and a young girl speaking in unison. Do you think a chain will be enough to stop me? I kept going. She wiggled one wing out from beneath her, jabbing the hook into the hollow of my shoulder. I gasped as it pressed deeper into my skin. Victor roughly pushed her wing back down, the violent withdrawal of the hook making me see stars. Through all of that, I still kept going. We turned her onto her side so that Victor could pin her wings against her back. She screeched the entire time, the proboscis shooting back to slap him in the cheek. We almost had her. Then we heard a wail from inside the house. What now? The pest abruptly paused in her struggles to leer at us, then she sang, "The baby's coming." You've got to be kidding me. Her fighting resumed with far more force than before. That man that she'd killed had merely been an appetizer for her. The baby was her true prize. Her eyes were wild with excitement, saliva dripping off of her fangs as she watched the front door open. Oh no! Go back inside! Victor shouted as we both used all that we had to try to keep the pest in place. The farmer yelled back, distress making his voice higher, "Something's wrong. I have to get her to the hospital." I risked a glance. The woman was white as a sheet, holding on to her husband for dear life as he half-led half-dragged her to his truck. Blood stained the inside of the woman's legs. At the sight of it, Victor froze. I didn't like the way he looked at the woman then. Oh no! The creature went into a complete frenzy. She managed to get her fangs into Victor's arm, wrenching a cry of agony from him as she ripped a sizable chunk of flesh out. His hold on her loosened just enough that she could wriggle a wing out. I screamed as I felt her beginning to slip away, frantically reaching for the nearest part of her, which was unfortunately her dangling intestines. It was like trying to hold on to oversized wet noodles, my hands slipping in her chunky blood as I struggled to slow her down. They just needed to reach the truck. We just had to keep her here just long enough for them to get a head start. I just hoped that I wouldn't end up having to protect them from my boss, too. She roared as she turned and slashed me across the brow with one of her clawed fingers. My vision went dark in my right eye. Numbly, I wondered if she ripped my eye out, or if it was just from the pain. By some miracle, I didn't let go. Fortunately, the bite seemed to snap Victor out of whatever had happened to him when he saw the woman's blood. At least for the moment. He scrambled across the ground, seizing my shotgun. His first shot missed. The second one hit her left wing. The farmer had the truck's passenger side door open as he helped his wife inside. The pest reached a talon towards them, trying to drag herself closer. Victor was back on his feet and marched over to shoot her in the head. Once. Twice. The truck's engine roared to life. With it, the pest screeched in rage, the sound warped by the damage done to her mouth after Victor had unloaded on her. She flailed as she watched her prize speed down the road. But it wasn't over. The gunshot wound in her wing was already closing up. It wouldn't take her long to catch up to them if we lost her. My cheek was wet. Turns out, I didn't lose an eye. I just had blood in it. Thank God. I crawled over her, trying the chains again as Victor went back to holding her wings against her body. She called him every foul name in the book, words slurring from her destroyed jaw. One of them touched a nerve, "Bitch of the wild hunt." He wordlessly snatched the salt from my belt and poured it over her face, holding her jaw to shove the container into her mouth. She gurgled and started to convulse as the salt was forced down her throat. That shut her up. With the chain pinning her arms and wings against her body, Victor dug the padlock out of his pocket, using it to secure the links. "I'm going to try to get her to the barn," he yelled over the sound of her agitated howls. I retrieved the shotgun and followed him as he carried the squirming, shrieking pest towards the barn. I pressed the palm of my hand to the cut on my brow. A flutter of unease went through my gut as it occurred to me that I could be in danger from Victor as well. It didn't help that the pest had noticed it, too. She was goading him, "That girl smells sweet, doesn't she? You want more salt in your mouth?" he threatened flatly. "We got plenty and we have some time until sunrise." She cackled, "You can't tell me that your mouth isn't watering thinking of her soft flesh between your teeth. Her blood warming your tongue. You long to feel warm again, don't you, dead man?" The borderline pornographic way that she spoke about devouring me made me intensely uncomfortable. "Keep it up and I'll pack the salt up your nose, too," Victor retorted. Once we got to the barn, we found an empty stall, which he tossed her into. I didn't follow him into the stall. My gut was telling me that something was off. He drew a circle of salt around her. As long as it wasn't broken, it would trap her until sunrise. I didn't think the boss would ever intentionally hurt me. But the way he looked at that woman. What if he couldn't control himself? Victor shut the stall door behind him, leaving the pest to wail and swear at us from her prison. His eyes went to my forehead. "That looks like it hurts." I swallowed back the lump in my throat. There it was again. That look. "Stay back, Vic," I said calmly, my unease growing. He took a deep breath, his eyes closing. I took a small step away from him, towards the exit to the barn. I kept my voice even. "Vic, be honest with me. Is it safe to be around you right now?" Victor stayed where he was, still not looking at me. He eventually answered, "Probably not." I took another step towards the door. "I'm going to leave." He nodded, eyes still shut. "I think that would be best. I'll make sure that she stays in the stall." As I backed towards the door, afraid to turn my back on him, I said, "I'll, see you at work tomorrow." "Yeah. See you." I didn't dare turn my back on him until I'd left the barn. He didn't move a muscle the entire time. As I made my way back to my G6, I kept looking over my shoulder. Victor didn't follow me. I made it back to my car without incident. I thought back to when I'd found him in the butcher shed. Looking back, I'm fairly sure that he'd been eating it. Once I was in my apartment, I quickly drew lines of salt in front of all my doors and windows. It made me feel somewhat safer. I inspected the injuries on my forehead and shoulder. After cleaning them both up, I determined that I should probably see a doctor in the morning. In the meantime, I covered them both with gauze. I painfully settled down onto my bed, my entire body aching. Even though I felt like a dish towel that had been wrung out over and over again, I knew that I wasn't going to be getting much sleep. My mind was racing too much. Against my better judgment, I ended up texting Victor, "Are you Draugr?" His response was, "I think so." Draugr are known for their grotesque appetites. The joke Raina and I had been making about him being a high-functioning zombie wasn't all that far off, after all. I reminded myself that Victor wasn't a complete monster. He'd at least had enough control over himself not to hurt me or either of the farmers. But the temptation had clearly been there. That begged the question of what his limits were. Was it safe to work with him? Injuries aren't exactly uncommon at Orion. Maybe that's why he's been sending Raina and I together for two-person jobs rather than going on calls with us. I received another message from him, "If you want to quit, I understand." I didn't, though. As stressful as working here can be, I do enjoy my job, weirdly enough. I've been treated better here than by any other employer, and I like having only two other co-workers to worry about, especially since I get along well with both of them. But the biggest reason quitting hasn't occurred to me is that I wouldn't be able to just walk away from all that I'd learned about the atypical cases. There was no way I could live a normal life after working at Orion. I also wanted to keep an eye on Victor. Between whatever the mechanic was forcing him to do and his transformation, there was a lot that I was concerned about. As much as I didn't want to think about having to trap or kill Victor, if it came down to it, I'd do what needed to be done. I sent back, "Hazard pay?" His reply was, unamused face. A moment later, I received, "We'll discuss it when I don't have a Macaranga mining me." Yin see why I kept calling her a pest rather than trying to type that long name out each time? I guarantee I would have misspelled it several diverse ways. When the sun rose, I received another message from Victor, "It's over. Thanks for your help. We found out later in the afternoon that the hospital had been able to save the farmer's baby. She was going to have to stay longer in the hospital, but otherwise, she and their newborn daughter were all right. What was alarming was that the dead man's body had been desecrated at some point after I left. It was believed that the pest had been the one to take chunks out of his neck, shoulder, and chest. I wasn't going to be the one to tell the family the truth. They'd been through enough already without the news that the one they'd relied on for protection had gotten hungry. I wondered if being exposed to so much blood had been the trigger. I suppose I should just be glad that Victor had eaten a man who was already dead instead of me or another living person. Like I said, I'm going to have to keep an eye on him. In the meantime, maybe don't demand to speak to the manager.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.